pot. My name is Sophia Bennett. I am 31 years old. The betrayal hit me in the middle of a supposedly routine meeting at our family advisor's office in Indianapolis. My parents had insisted we all sit down to secure the baby's future now that I was 5 months pregnant after our long struggle with IVF. I had trusted them despite past tensions. Then the advisor cleared his throat and slid over a stack of papers. My mother spoke first, her voice dripping with false concern. Sophia, we have known for weeks that the clinic records show irregularities we had to fix for your own good. We paid to make sure the donor was the right fit. The truth crashed over me. My own parents had secretly meddled in my pregnancy to seize control over my life and the child. I clenched my fists under the table, vowing I would uncover every lie and protect my family no matter what it cost me. If you have ever had your own parents insert themselves into your most private life moments like this, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done. I am reading every single one. Let me back up so you understand how I ended up in that office carrying a baby I had fought so hard for, only to learn my parents had been pulling strings behind my back the entire time. I work as a marketing account manager at a mid-sized logistics firm here in Indianapolis. I come from comfortable middle-class roots. My grandmother left a trust of $2.8 million that had been set up to pass to me when I turned 30. I never flaunted it. I drove a 7-year-old crossover and packed my own lunch most days. The money was security, not my identity, but it made me a target in ways I never saw coming. I met my husband, Ryan Carter, 3 years ago at a company charity event my firm co-sponsored. He was there as a guest of one of our vendors. Tall, easygoing, with a quiet sense of humor that made the long evening bearable. He asked about my work instead of my background. We dated for 14 months before he proposed. My mother, Patricia Bennett, had opinions from the first dinner. After that night, she pulled me aside in the driveway. That man's ambition does not match his bank account, Sophia. Something feels off. I told her she was being overprotective. We argued. The kind of argument that leaves 2 years of birthday texts and polite holiday calls in its wake. My father, Edward Bennett, stayed quiet during those fights, the way he always did when my mother took the lead. Ryan and I got married in a small ceremony at a local park. He cried during his vows, real tears that made my chest tighten. We tried for a baby naturally for 20 months. Nothing. The fertility specialist delivered the news like a quiet hammer. Ryan had severe male factor infertility. Natural conception was not going to happen. He looked devastated in the car on the way home. I comforted him, told him we would figure it out together because that is what marriage meant. What I did not know then was that my parents had already started their own quiet campaign. They had recommended the clinic we chose. They had offered to cover part of the cost. They had even sat in on one of the initial consultations when I was too nauseous to go. I thought it was support. The first IVF cycle failed. I cried for days. Ryan held me. My mother sent flowers and a note that read these things: take time. The second cycle, the one that finally worked, happened 7 months ago. Positive test. 2 pink lines that made me sob happy tears in the bathroom at work. Ryan spun me around the kitchen when I told him. He started talking about nursery colors and first steps. Then, almost casually, he mentioned we should update some paperwork now that we were becoming a family of 3. I thought it was sweet. Small changes started after that. My mother began texting more often, asking for every doctor appointment detail. My father would call Ryan directly to check in on how the pregnancy was progressing. They insisted on joining us for the 20-week scan. I brushed it off as excited grandparents to be. Then came the meeting with David Klein, our family financial advisor, the one that changed everything. We sat around the polished conference table. David looked uncomfortable from the moment we walked in. He had known my parents for decades. He cleared his throat and opened the folder. Sophia, before we discuss the trust provisions for the child, there are some irregularities I need to disclose. Your parents reached out to me 6 weeks ago with additional instructions. My mother leaned forward, perfectly composed in her navy cardigan. "We only wanted to protect you, sweetheart. The clinic your husband chose had some concerns about the sample quality. We made a few calls, paid what was necessary to ensure the right outcome. $45,000 total to the nurse and the embryologist. It was for the best." The room tilted. $45,000. My father shifted in his seat and let out an awkward half laugh, the kind people use when they hope the tension will dissolve. "Pat, maybe we should ease into this," he said, but my mother cut him off with a sharp glance. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You paid the clinic staff to interfere with my pregnancy." My mother's smile did not reach her eyes. "We selected a donor with a stronger genetic profile, one from a family we could trust. The records now reflect a natural conception after the first cycle failed. It is cleaner this way." No questions later about why the baby does not look exactly like Ryan. "We were thinking of your reputation in our circle, Sophia. People talk." My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick right there on the advisor's carpet. This was not support. This was control. They had turned my pregnancy into their project bribing staff to rewrite reality so they could hold the truth over my head like a leash. David slid more papers across the table. Emails between my mother and the clinic nurse, Hannah Ruiz. Payment records routed through a small account my parents controlled. A note from the embryologist, James Fletcher, confirming the switch had been completed without my knowledge. My husband, Ryan, sat beside me, face pale, gripping my hand so tight his knuckles went white. He had no idea either. I stared at my mother. "You did this behind my back. You paid strangers to play God with my child." She sighed like I was the dramatic one. "Someone had to look out for the long term, Sophia. Your husband is a good man, but he is not from our world. The trust has conditions now. We added language that gives us input on major decisions for the grandchild. Education, medical choices, even where the child lives if things become unstable. It is standard estate planning." My father cleared his throat again and tried to change the subject. "Let us not turn this into a fight. The baby is healthy. That is what matters." But his voice lacked conviction. He would not meet my eyes. I stood up so fast the chair scraped loud against the floor. "This meeting is over. I am taking these documents and I am leaving." My mother's voice followed me to the door, calm and cutting. "Think carefully before you do anything rash, Sophia. Public exposure of fertility issues can be very embarrassing in our community. We would hate for people to start asking questions about why you needed help conceiving in the first place." The threat hung in the air like smoke. I walked out with Ryan, heart hammering the folder clutched to my chest. In the parking lot, he pulled me into a hug. "We will figure this out," he whispered. But I could already feel the ground shifting under us. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Ryan breathed steadily beside me. My own parents had turned my pregnancy into a power play. They had bribed medical professionals, altered records, and added secret clauses to my grandmother's trust. Also, they could control me and the baby. The realization settled cold and heavy in my chest. The next morning, I called my best friend, Lauren Hayes. She listened without interrupting while I told her everything. When I finished, she said, "Sophia, this is bigger than overbearing parents. You need professional help, a lawyer, and someone who can dig into what they really did at that clinic." I knew she was right. 2 days later, I met with Amanda Torres, a Sharp estate and family law attorney recommended by a colleague. I showed her the folder. Her eyebrows rose as she read. "This is serious. They have created a paper trail that could be used against you in any future custody or trust dispute. We need to move fast." She referred me to a private investigator named Kevin Brooks. He was ex-law enforcement no-nonsense and promised results in under 2 weeks. While he worked, I tried to keep my life normal. I went to work, handled client meetings, smiled through my marketing presentations. But every text from my mother felt like a tripwire. Every call from my father felt like a reminder that they were watching. Dr. Nicole Patel, my obstetrician, noticed something was off at my next appointment. I broke down in the exam room and told her the basics. She listened, then quietly checked her own records. There were some unusual notes added last month. I will look into it on my end. Her nurse, Leah Thompson, stepped in and confirmed she had seen Hannah Ruiz from the fertility clinic at a staff meeting weeks earlier. Small pieces were starting to connect. Kevin Brooks called me 6 days later. I have the full picture. Your mother, Patricia, did not stop at the bribe. She reached out to the donor, James Fletcher, directly through a back channel, offered him an extra $15,000 to stay silent and sign an agreement that would let her dictate any future contact. She is building a narrative that you are emotionally fragile from the fertility struggle. She has already spoken to 3 people in your professional circle, including your boss at the marketing firm. I stared at him. My own mother was turning my pregnancy into a smear campaign before the baby even arrived. Kevin continued. There is one more piece. Your older sister, Brooke Bennett, has been looped in. She helped coordinate some of the payments from a joint account she shares with your parents. Brooke has been telling mutual friends that you have been distant since the wedding and that Ryan might not be the most stable choice for fatherhood. Brooke, of course she was involved. My sister had always been the one my mother held up as the example, the one with the perfect corporate job and the picture-perfect life. I had never resented her success, but now the favoritism felt like a knife. Kevin saw my face and added, I can keep digging, but you need to decide how you want to play this. Confront them now or gather more and strike when they least expect it. I left that meeting with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got home, Ryan was waiting with takeout and a determined look. We ate in silence for a few minutes before he said, we should call your father separately. He seemed uncomfortable in the advisor's office. Maybe he is not fully on board with what your mother is doing. I wanted to believe that, but I remembered how my father had tried to deflect with that awkward laugh. Still, I agreed to try. The call to my father happened that evening. I put it on speaker so Ryan could hear. Edward Bennett picked up on the second ring. His voice sounded tired. Sophia, I have been meaning to reach out. Your mother is only trying to help. She worries about the future. I kept my tone even. Dad, this is not help. This is them rewriting my pregnancy without my consent. They bribed medical staff. They involved Brooke. How can you defend that? There was a long pause. Then my father's voice cracked just slightly. I told her it was going too far. I said we should talk to you first, but you know how she gets when she has an idea. She believes she is protecting the family legacy. His words carried a hint of real frustration, something I had rarely heard directed at my mother. For a moment, I thought he might actually side with me. Then he added, but the baby is healthy, Sophia. Maybe we can all sit down and work this out like adults. No more secrets. It was not the full break I hoped for, but it was something. My father was showing cracks. He even suggested meeting without my mother present to clear the air. Ryan squeezed my hand across the table. We set a coffee date for the following weekend, but my mother was not about to let any cracks widen. The next afternoon, she called while I was at work. I stepped into the hallway to take it. Her voice came through sharp and laced with that familiar mix of concern and contempt. Sophia, I heard you met with that investigator. Really hiring outsiders to dig into your own family? After everything we have done to give you and that baby a secure start, I gripped the phone tighter. You bribed people to change my medical records, Mom. You involved my sister in it. You do not get to act like the victim here. She laughed softly, the sound cold and cutting. Victim. I am the one who has spent years watching you make choices that put our family's future at risk. Ryan is a nice man, but he brings nothing to the table. No substantial assets, no connections. We fixed that for you. The donor we chose has a background we can actually be proud of. Stronger genetics, better prospects for the child. But instead of thanking us, you run to lawyers and private eyes like some paranoid child. Her words landed like slaps. I felt heat rise in my face. This is my body, my baby. You had no right. My mother's tone dropped lower, more venomous. Rights. Let me remind you whose trust fund paid for that fancy IVF clinic in the first place. We added the clauses for a reason. If you keep pushing this narrative of betrayal, the community will hear how unstable the pregnancy has made you. Brooke already mentioned to a few people how erratic you have seemed lately. Think about how that looks for custody discussions down the line if things with Ryan ever turn sour. The threat was unmistakable. She was weaponizing my own pregnancy against me. I ended the call without another word, my heart pounding so hard I had to lean against the wall. When I told Ryan later that evening, he paced the living room. She's escalating. We need to move faster. Need to move. Kevin Brooks called the following morning with the latest update. Your mother contacted the embryologist, James Fletcher, again, offered him money to backdate more records. She is panicking because she knows you have originals. And Brooke posted something vague on social media yesterday about family loyalty and protecting the next generation. It is coded, but people in your circle will read between the lines. I felt the walls closing in. My own family was turning the people I worked with and socialized with against me, one quiet conversation at a time. That same afternoon, my colleague Marcus Lang pulled me aside in the break room. He looked uncomfortable. Sophia, your sister Brooke, reached out to me through a mutual friend. She said, you have been under a lot of stress and might need time off. Is everything okay at home? Marcus had always been professional, but the concern in his eyes told me the narrative was spreading. I forced a smile and told him it was just normal pregnancy stuff. Inside, I was screaming. My mother had turned my workplace into another battlefield. The weekend coffee with my father arrived. We met at a small cafe near his office. He looked older than I remembered, bags under his eyes. For the first 15 minutes, he danced around the subject, asking about work and the baby's kicks. Then he set his cup down hard. I confronted your mother last night after your call. Told her she went too far with the bribes and involving Brooke. She did not like hearing it. We argued for an hour. First real fight we have had in years. His voice carried real anger now, not the deflection I had seen before. But she is convinced she is right, Sophia. She sees this as saving you from a mistake. I do not know how to get through to her. For the first time in my life, I saw my father truly divided. He even offered to speak to the trust advisor, David Klein, on my behalf to remove some of the new clauses. It felt like a small lifeline. I left that meeting with a flicker of hope. But hope shattered fast. That evening, my mother showed up at our house unannounced. Ryan answered the door, and she brushed past him like he was not there. She stood in our living room, eyes locked on me. I know you met with your father behind my back, trying to turn him against me now after all the years I sacrificed for you. Her voice rose with each word sharp as broken glass. You are ungrateful, Sophia. Always have been. Chasing that marketing job like it matters more than family. Marrying a man with no real prospects. And now this tantrum over a few smart decisions we made for your child. My father had followed her in his face, flushed. Patricia, stop. This is not helping. But she ignored him, completely turning the full force of her contempt on me. You think you can just cut us out? The trust is not yours until you prove you can handle it. One more move with that investigator and we revoke the provisions for the grandchild entirely. Brooke agrees with me. She would be happy to step in as guardian if it comes to that. The room went dead silent. My father stared at her in open shock, then his shoulders slumped. He did not defend me this time. He simply looked defeated. Ryan stepped forward, his voice low and steady. You need to leave. Now. My mother smiled that cold smile again. Think about it, Sophia. Family or your little rebellion. You have 48 hours before I make the next call to the trust board. She turned and walked out. My father hesitated at the door, gave me one last pained look, and followed her without another word. I stood there shaking. The ultimatum hung in the air like a guillotine. My own parents had just threatened to strip away my child's future, and my sister was ready to take my place. Ryan pulled me into his arms, but I could not stop the dread building in my chest. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from the family trust attorney. It outlined new restrictions effective immediately unless I agreed to family mediation. My mother had moved faster than I expected, and inside the envelope was a copy of a social media post from Brooke that had already been shared in our professional circles. The caption read, "Sometimes the hardest thing is watching someone you love make choices that hurt the whole family." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. The net was tightening faster than I could cut it. One wrong step now, and I could lose everything I had fought for. And my parents knew it. The certified letter from the trust attorney sat on our kitchen table the next morning, its formal language spelling out new restrictions that would activate unless I agreed to family mediation within 48 hours. My sister's social media post had already spread through our professional circles, with my colleague Marcus Lang texting me later that day asking if everything was okay at home. The pressure was building like a storm I could not outrun. Ryan sat across from me, his face drawn, and we both knew the clock was ticking. I spent the next 2 days in constant contact with my lawyers, Amanda Torres and Thomas Riley. They reviewed every document Kevin Brooks had gathered. The private investigator had uncovered the final piece that made my blood run cold during a late-night call. My mother had not just acted out of control. She had her own history from years ago, before I was born, struggling with infertility herself and forced into similar medical interventions by her own parents. The resentment she carried had turned into a need to control my pregnancy the way she had never been able to control her own. The twist hit me like a punch. All this time, her actions were rooted in her own pain, but that did not excuse the damage she was causing to mine. Kevin warned me she was desperate to rewrite her past through my life, and that desperation made her dangerous. The mediation meeting was scheduled at David Klein's office 3 days later. My husband Ryan and I arrived early, hearts pounding. My mother Patricia arrived with my father Edward and my sister Brooke in tow. The room felt small and tense the moment they walked in. My mother took the head of the table like she owned it, perfectly composed in her navy cardigan. "Sophia, this nonsense has to stop," my mother said, her voice sharp and laced with that familiar contempt. "You have turned a simple family decision into a circus. We paid to ensure the best for the grandchild. You should be thanking us instead of hiring strangers to dig up dirt." My father shifted in his seat, his face showing clear shock turning to visible frustration. "Patricia, we talked about this. The bribes were too far. I told you we should have discussed it first." His voice had an edge. I rarely heard an interruption that showed he was finally pushing back. But my mother shot him a withering look that made him fall silent, though his jaw remained clenched in quiet anger. And he later stepped out of the room for a moment to collect himself before returning without meeting my eyes. Brooke jumped in, her tone matching my mother's. "Sophia, you have always been the one who needs extra help. Remember how you struggled with the first cycle? We were only trying to make sure the baby has the best start." The discussion escalated quickly into psychological jabs that cut deep. My mother laid out their demands in cold detail. They wanted ongoing input on the child's education and medical choices, quarterly reviews of the trust usage, and a clause that if Ryan and I ever faced difficulties, they would have priority in any custody discussions. "Sign this agreement today and we drop the public narrative about your stress," my mother said, sliding the papers across the table with a cold smile. "Refuse and we will have no choice but to protect the child our way. The community already has questions after Brooke's post. Your job at the marketing firm could be next if people start wondering about your stability." I felt the walls closing in. Kevin's report on the social media spread had shown my boss was already concerned about work-life balance. My job, my reputation, the stability I had built for the baby were all at risk. Ryan gripped my hand under the table, his face pale, but he stayed silent to let me decide. My father tried one last time after returning to the room. "This is getting out of hand. Sophia is a good mother. We should trust her." His words were a rare defense, but my mother cut him off with a sharp Edward enough. You know what is at stake for the family legacy. He looked at me with regret, but ultimately stayed quiet, the conflict clear on his face, before he stared at the table in defeat. The room fell into a heavy silence. I looked at my mother, the woman who had raised me, and saw the long-held resentment in her eyes mixed with her own unresolved pain. The hidden truth about her past infertility made her actions make a twisted kind of sense, but it did not make them right. Amanda and Thomas advised me quietly in the corner that fighting everything in court could drag on for months, drain our savings, and risk the baby's future if the trust provisions were frozen. After hours of back and forth with threats hanging in the air like smoke, I made the painful choice to protect the baby from a full-blown legal war, to keep my job, and to avoid the reputation damage that could follow us for years. I agreed to limited terms: quarterly family meetings and their input on major education and medical decisions for the child, plus some oversight on trust disbursements until the baby turned 18. It felt like defeat, like handing them a piece of the life I had fought so hard to build. They kept real influence, and I walked away with compromised autonomy. My mother smiled triumphantly as I signed, while my father looked away, the defeat in his posture clear. The baby was born 3 months later, a healthy boy we named Lucas. My parents were there at the hospital, acting as if nothing had happened. My mother held him first, whispering about the bright future they had secured for him. My father stood back, offering a quiet hug, but no real challenge to her control. Ryan and I brought Lucas home to a new apartment on the other side of Indianapolis to create some distance, but the quarterly meetings started almost immediately. Contact with my parents became formal and cold. My sister sent occasional messages, but the trust was gone. Lauren tried to support me through it all, but even she could see the emotional toll. I learned that sometimes protecting your child means swallowing your pride and accepting a compromised future. It left me isolated from the family I once knew, with a heavy heart and the constant reminder that my parents' control had won in the end. The baby is thriving, but every mediation session feels like a quiet surrender. I chose the lesser evil for his sake, and that choice cost me the full freedom I had dreamed of. Family is not always blood or biology. Sometimes it is the painful boundaries you have to draw, even when it breaks your heart. Thank you for listening to my story. It still hurts to think about how my own parents turned my pregnancy into a battlefield. Have you ever had to make a painful compromise like this to protect your child, even if it meant losing part of yourself? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. I read every single one.